Joining us now to voice his concerns about any challenge is Congressman Massie. He's the representative serving Kentucky's 4th District and says he will not be objecting to the Electoral College vote. So, Representative, I appreciate you coming on tonight. This is going to be a little bit of a bitter debate taking place on Wednesday. We know that several Republicans have come out and said that they are going to object to the Electoral College vote. We know that several Republicans have said that this is a dangerous precedent to set. So where do you stand on this issue and why?
Well, let me start with 3 inconvenient truths, Alex. Number 1, Joe Biden is going to be declared president by Congress because these objections will be made in a House that Nancy Pelosi controls. There's a scenario where each state could get 1 vote, but that scenario doesn't kick in unless the effort on January 6th to decertify electors is successful, but it's going to fail. People need to know that because Nancy Pelosi controls a majority of the votes there, and it happens by a majority vote. The second inconvenient truth here is that no state has sent competing electors. Every state has sent only 1 slate of electors, and no state has asked Congress to decertify its electors. In fact, I've said that if a state gets a hold of me, if a majority of the legislators in a state contacts me and says to decertify their electors, I would vote to decertify their electors because constitutionally, it's interesting, on both sides of this argument, everybody agrees that constitutionally it's the legislatures that control the manner in which the electors are selected. The third inconvenient truth here, and I don't see this mentioned at all anywhere, is Bill Barr left on December 23rd. He didn't believe that an independent counsel was necessary. I urged him to appoint one and to have an investigation. Now we've got a new attorney general that Donald Trump chose. President Trump chose this attorney general to be assistant attorney general and then elevated him to the position. And as far as we can tell, there is no investigation by somebody Trump selected only a couple weeks ago. So those are 3 inconvenient truths. I come down on the states' rights side of this. The legislatures, the state legislatures, according to the Constitution, they could decide to flip a coin and assign their electors in that manner. Now, they've all decided to have a popular vote in their states, but unless or until they complain to Congress and say that their power was usurped, I don't believe it's been usurped. They have to tell us that it was.
And of course, a lot of the people who are voicing their support for this Electoral College challenge, they say that they want to create an election commission of sorts. A 10-day audit, I think, is something that they've said, too, to look into allegations of voter fraud. But are you saying that perhaps the way to get to the bottom of that would be the implementation of a special counsel, perhaps, instead of going down this route, which many people say does kind of violate the Constitution in many ways?
Well, a commission would be a great idea, too. The problem is there aren't 10 days between now and January 6th. There's 1 day, less than 24 hours. So there's not time to have that commission. There's also no mechanism for Republicans to call for a vote or to succeed on a vote in the House of Representatives to appoint that commission. Again, nobody wants to hear this, but Nancy Pelosi controls the House of Representatives. I would love to have a commission. I think it's a good idea. I think we should have had investigations in the House, but we're not able to because Nancy Pelosi controls all of those votes.
And the way that this works, too, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if there are any objections to any individual state, then the 2 chambers convene separately, and it's just an up and down vote whether or not to accept those results. And I think that it would have to be both chambers, both the Senate and the House, in order to make any rejection of those numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct. We'll have 2 hours of debate when there's an objection. We're not sure how many states that the senators will object to. It could be 1, 2, or 6 states. I'm pretty sure there's enough objections in the House to have a debate on at least 6, but you don't even get to the debate unless you have both a senator and a House member objecting. Each of those debates will take 2 hours. There'll be 2 separate debates happening simultaneously, so we have to flip back and forth, I suppose, between those 2 debates. And at the end, there will be a vote, and in order to reject electors, the vote would have to succeed in both the House and the Senate, and this is where we get to that inconvenient truth that it just won't happen. Listen, Alex, the reason, so now that we know it's a symbolic vote, there are good reasons on both sides, okay? So my colleagues who are going to object to the electors say that if they don't push back on the states, then that we won't have fair elections. That's a good point. My problem is if we set this precedent, if we as Republicans, as constitutionalists and federalists, if we say that the Congress should be able to override the Electoral College, in 4 short years, if we were lucky enough to win the Electoral College, what would happen is if Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi control the 2 respective chambers, it's not an exercise, it's a live fire drill. And what would happen is they would go to every red state that has voter ID laws using the same logic that Republicans used and say, well, the 14th Amendment, people were disenfranchised, those disenfranchised minorities when you have voter ID laws, and they would throw out the Electoral College, replace it with their preference. And that's a very dangerous precedent for us to set, and they would go there in a heartbeat. And I know they would probably go there anyway. They would try it anyway. Yeah. But if we leave the high ground with the public, if we move the public discussion, then we've left the high ground, and then we're not going to win that argument in 4 years.
And I do see that argument as well, too, because essentially it would mean then for any president to take power, they would also have to have Congress with them. I mean, that is essentially the precedent that I think a lot of people are worried about, and especially for Republicans, too, who I would say disproportionately rely on Electoral College victories as opposed to what Democrats have been pushing for several years now, which is to do away with that system and go to a straight popular vote. So I do see that they could use that as well as leverage against doing away with the Electoral College. But Representative Massie, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight and breaking down your perspective on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on.